General Thane's boots echoed through the pristine corridors of the Dominion, flagship of the Keth Imperial Fleet. Every surface gleamed with polished metal, every angle calculated for maximum efficiency. The warship hummed with the quiet precision of a civilization that had eliminated waste, emotion, and error from their existence over 3,000 years ago. Standing before the tactical display in the command center, Thane observed the blue-green world rotating slowly in the hologram. Earth, the third planet of an unremarkable star system on the galaxy's outer rim. Intelligence reports indicated primitive technology, chemical rockets, basic nuclear weapons, fragmented governments constantly at war with each other. Another simple conquest to add to the Imperium's collection of 10,000 subjugated species. Analysis. Complete, General, announced Captain Vex, his pale golden skin bearing the distinctive facial scars of the Keth warrior caste. Like all Keth soldiers, Vex stood exactly 2.1 meters tall, possessed reflexes 15 times faster than baseline organic life, and could process tactical information with computer-like precision. The species calls themselves humans. Their largest military force numbers barely 3 million. Estimated conquest time, 72 hours. Thane nodded, his silver eyes reflecting the sterile light. The Keth had perfected warfare through genetic engineering and psychological conditioning. Their soldiers felt no fear, experienced no doubt, and executed orders with flawless coordination. They had conquered civilizations with armies 100 times larger than Earth's entire population. Peculiar readings in their communication networks, added Lieutenant Kira, the youngest member of Thane's command staff. The humans broadcast constantly entertainment, news, personal messages. Emotional. Volatility appears extreme, even for a primitive species. Irrelevant, Thane replied. Emotion is weakness. Fear leads to panic. Love leads to poor tactical decisions. Hope leads to futile resistance. The Keth eliminated these flaws millennia ago. The command center fell silent, except for the gentle hum of machinery. Around them, 50,000 Keth. Warriors maintained perfect discipline in the fleet's ships. Each soldier was genetically identical in capability, trained from birth in the arts of war, and psychologically conditioned to view death as simply another tactical outcome. Initiate first contact protocols, Thane commanded. Offer standard terms, immediate surrender in exchange for incorporation into the Imperium with minimal casualties. The transmission went out across space, translated into every human language. Simultaneously, Thane expected the typical response pattern: initial defiance, followed by swift capitulation once Earth's leaders realized the futility of resistance. No species had ever rejected the Imperium's terms once they witnessed Keth military superiority. But humanity's response arrived within hours, broadcast from every major population center on Earth, not from a single governmental authority, but from thousands of sources. Leaders, soldiers, and civilians alike delivering the same impossible message: absolute refusal. They must not understand our capabilities, Captain Vex suggested, analyzing the chaotic flood of human communications. Thane studied the responses, noting something that made his enhanced intellect pause. The humans weren't simply rejecting conquest, they were actively embracing the prospect of hopeless war. Their communications spoke of concepts the Keth language had no direct translations for: dying free, fighting for honor, protecting something called home. General, Lieutenant, Kira interrupted. They're mobilizing their entire planetary population. Not just military forces, civilians are constructing defensive positions, manufacturing weapons, sending their young to safety while adults prepare for battle. Tactically unsound, Thane observed. They should negotiate. But something in those chaotic human transmissions troubled him. The Keth had achieved perfection through logic and control. Yet these humans seemed to draw strength from the very emotional chaos that the Imperium had bred out of themselves centuries ago. "Begin orbital reconnaissance," Thane ordered. "If they insist on learning through defeat, we shall provide instruction." As the fleet moved toward Earth, General Thane couldn't shake the feeling that this conquest might prove different from all the others. For the first time in his flawless military career, he found himself genuinely curious about an enemy's response. The invasion began at dawn over the Pacific Ocean. Keth dropships descended through Earth's atmosphere like silver tears, their energy shields deflecting primitive missile attacks. General Thane observed from the command deck as his forces deployed with clockwork precision, exactly as they had on 847 previous worlds. Colonel Marcus Reed crouched in a muddy foxhole outside Sacramento, watching alien craft land in perfect geometric formations. At 45, Reed had served in 3 different wars, but nothing had prepared him for this. The enemy soldiers that emerged moved with inhuman synchronization, their pale golden skin gleaming beneath advanced armor. "Sir," whispered Sergeant Lopez, adjusting her rifle scope. "They're not taking cover." Reed peered through his binoculars. She was right. The Keth advanced across open ground in neat rows, apparently confident their shields would deflect any human weapons. Their movements were flawlessly coordinated, each soldier stepping in perfect rhythm with thousands of others. "Beautiful," Reed muttered, "like watching a ballet." Then he keyed his radio. "All units, wait for my signal. Let them get close." On the Dominion, Thane monitored the first engagement through his soldiers' neural links. The human defensive positions appeared chaotic, hastily dug trenches, improvised barriers, troops spread in seemingly random patterns. Several human commanders were actually arguing over strategy even as the Keth approached. "Disorganized rabble," Captain Vex commented. "This will end quickly." But when Reed's forces opened fire, something unexpected happened. The humans didn't fire in coordinated volleys, like civilized armies. Instead, each soldier aimed at different targets, creating overlapping fields of fire that found gaps in Keth, shielding through pure statistical chaos. More disturbing, when Keth returned fire eliminated human positions, the surviving soldiers didn't retreat in logical formations. They scattered wildly, regrouped in unpredictable locations, and continued fighting from directions the Keth hadn't anticipated. Private Maria Santos crawled through drainage tunnels beneath the city, her heart pounding with terror and rage. She'd watched the aliens kill her entire squad with clinical precision, showing no emotion, no satisfaction, no anger. Just cold efficiency. It made her sick. "They fight like machines," she radioed to her remaining squad mates. "Then we fight like humans," came the reply from Corporal Jackson, positioned 2 miles away. "Messy, stupid, and mean." Santos emerged from a storm drain behind Keth lines and opened fire on their command post. The aliens reacted with perfect tactical discipline, moving to eliminate the threat with minimal resources. But Santos had already disappeared into the urban maze, and 3 more human soldiers appeared in different locations, each attacking from unexpected angles. Thane watched his casualty reports with growing confusion. Individual human soldiers were vastly inferior to Keth warriors, slower, weaker, less accurate. But their collective behavior defied every military model in the Imperium's databases. They refused to surrender even when completely surrounded. They wasted ammunition on futile gestures. They prioritized rescuing wounded comrades over maintaining tactical advantages. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to fight harder as their situation became more hopeless. "General," reported Lieutenant Kira, "human resistance is intensifying. They're using primitive chemical explosives in suicide attacks." Suicide attacks? Thane had read about such concepts in historical databases, but no civilized species had employed them for centuries. "Are they malfunctioning?" No, sir. They appear to be volunteers. Many are broadcasting final messages to family members. Thane accessed one of these transmissions. A young human female, tears streaming down her face, speaking to an image of two small children. Mommy has to go stop the bad people, babies. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. The woman then drove a vehicle packed with explosives into a Keth formation, destroying herself and 17 alien soldiers. Emotional instability. Captain Vex diagnosed. They're self-destructing due to psychological stress. But Thane wasn't convinced. The human's final message hadn't sounded unstable. It had sounded purposeful, determined, as if her emotional attachment to those children had somehow transformed her fear into something else entirely, something Keth had never encountered, the willingness to die not for tactical advantage, but for abstract concepts like love and protection. As night fell over the battlefield, General Thane found himself studying human communication intercepts with unprecedented interest. These creatures fought like no species in recorded galactic history. They turned their own weaknesses into weapons, their chaos into strategy, their emotions into fuel for impossible resistance. For the first time in 3 millennia of conquest, the perfect war machine of the Keth Imperium had encountered something it didn't understand. 72 hours had passed, the time Captain Vex had estimated for complete human surrender. Instead, resistance had spread across the planet like wildfire. General Thane stood in his command center, studying tactical displays that showed a war unlike any in Keth history. Impossible, murmured Lieutenant Kira, analyzing the data streams. They should have capitulated after losing their major population centers. The Keth had conquered New York, London, Tokyo, and Moscow within the first day. Standard protocol suggested the remaining human leadership would sue for peace to prevent further civilian casualties. Instead, the surviving governments had relocated underground and broadcast a simple message: we do not negotiate with invaders. More puzzling still, the fall of major cities had somehow strengthened human resistance rather than weakening it. Dr. Sarah Chun huddled in the subway tunnels beneath what had once been Manhattan, treating wounded civilians with dwindling medical supplies. Above ground, Keth occupation forces maintained perfect order, their scanning equipment methodically hunting for human holdouts. But the tunnels had become a vast underground city of refugees, resistance fighters, and ordinary people who refused to accept conquest. Doctor, called out a voice in the darkness. Jimmy Rodriguez, a construction worker turned guerrilla fighter, emerged from a side tunnel carrying a wounded soldier. Found this guy 3 blocks from the alien checkpoint. Says he's got information. Soldier, barely conscious, gripped Chun's arm with surprising strength. They don't understand us, he whispered urgently. Heard them talking. They can't predict what we'll do, because they think emotion makes us weak. Chun nodded, then turned to Rodriguez. Get word to the resistance cells. They're studying us like lab rats, trying to find patterns in our behavior. So what do? We be human, Chun replied, her voice hard with determination. Unpredictable, emotional, and too stubborn to know when we're beaten. On the Dominion, Thane reviewed after-action reports from his field commanders with growing frustration. The humans employed no consistent strategy. Individual units would sacrifice themselves to save civilians who served no tactical purpose. Soldiers would abandon advantageous positions to retrieve wounded comrades. Most incomprehensibly human, leaders frequently made decisions based on concepts like morale and hope rather than objective analysis. General, Captain Vex reported, 2nd Battalion encountered significant resistance at the Denver facility. The humans ... they sang while fighting. Sang? Battle hymns, apparently. Traditional songs about freedom and homeland. Our combat algorithms couldn't process the behavior pattern. The psychological warfare protocols had no response to musicality. As a combat tactic, Thane pulled up combat footage from the Denver engagement. Human soldiers, outnumbered 10-1, had linked arms and sung together as they charged Keth positions. The act was tactically insane. It made them easier targets, provided no strategic advantage, and served no logical purpose. Yet somehow, their coordinated voices had unnerved his perfect warriors more than enemy weapons fire. The Keth soldiers had responded with increased aggression, breaking formation to silence the singing. In doing so, they'd created gaps in their own defenses that the humans had immediately exploited. Emotional warfare, Thane concluded. They're weaponizing their psychological instability. But even as he spoke the words, he knew they weren't quite accurate. What he'd witnessed wasn't instability. It was something else entirely. The humans weren't fighting despite their emotions. They were fighting because of them. In a hidden bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Patricia Hayes coordinated global resistance efforts. Her command center looked nothing like the sterile perfection of Keth facilities' maps covered in handwritten notes. Communication equipment held together with tape and determination. Exhausted staff running on coffee. And sheer will. "Ma'am," reported her intelligence officer, "we've identified a pattern in their behavior. The aliens react poorly to what they call irrational human responses. They expect us to make optimal tactical decisions." Hayes smiled grimly. "Then we make sure nothing we do makes sense to them. Order all resistance cells to prioritize 3 things. Protect civilians over strategic assets. Never abandon wounded soldiers, and always fight for something bigger than tactical victory." That goes against every principle of modern warfare, her aide protested. "Exactly. We're not fighting a modern war. We are fighting for our humanity itself." Across the globe, the pattern repeated. In the Australian outback, Aboriginal elders taught young fighters ancient war songs that confused Keth audio sensors. In the Amazon, indigenous tribes used traditional hunting techniques to ambush alien patrols. In small towns across America, elderly residents shared stories of past wars, reminding everyone what they were fighting to preserve. General Thane found himself spending hours analyzing human communication intercepts, searching for logical patterns in their behavior. Instead, he discovered something that challenged every assumption the Keth had made about strength and weakness. The humans grew stronger through suffering. Their losses became fuel for greater resistance. Their emotional attachments to family, to homeland, to abstract ideals provided motivation that outlasted physical exhaustion and overcame tactical disadvantage. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to view the war not as a contest between armies, but as a struggle between fundamentally different ways of existing in the universe. As reports flooded in from battlefields across Earth, General Thane began to suspect that the Keth Imperium had encountered something unprecedented, a species that had turned imperfection into their greatest weapon. 3 weeks into the invasion, General Thane made an unprecedented decision. He transported down to Earth's surface to observe human resistance firsthand, something no Keth commander had done in over a millennium of conquest. The ruins of Chicago stretched before him, a maze of collapsed buildings and improvised fortifications. His enhanced senses detected thousands of human heat signatures hidden throughout the rubble, not cowering in defeat, but actively preparing for continued resistance. The tactical situation was clear. The humans had lost every strategic asset, controlled no territory of value, and faced an enemy with overwhelming technological superiority. By every logical measure, they should surrender. Instead, they were teaching their children to fight. Sister Margaret O'Malley led a group of refugee children through the basement of a damaged cathedral, her weathered hands gentle despite the rifle slung across her back. At 73, She should have been safely evacuated. Instead, she'd volunteered to stay behind and protect the young ones whose parents were fighting in the tunnels above. "Why don't we just hide until they go away, sister?" asked 8-year-old Tommy, his voice barely a whisper. "Because, child," Margaret replied, settling her rosary around her neck like armor, "some things are worth more than safety. Freedom is one of them. Love is another. The right to choose our own path through this world. That's worth everything." Through his neural implants, Fane observed this exchange. The elderly human female was indoctrinating the young with concepts that made no tactical sense. Freedom was an abstract notion with no measurable value. Love was a chemical reaction that impaired judgment. Choice was inefficient compared to optimal decision-making algorithms. Yet these worthless concepts were driving resistance that had cost the Keth more casualties than their previous 100 conquests combined. "General," Captain Vex's voice crackled through the comb. "Anomalous behavior detected in Sector 7. You should observe this." Fane moved through the rubble toward the coordinates, his powered armor silent despite the debris. What he found challenged his understanding of warfare itself. A group of human soldiers surrounding a single wounded Keth warrior who had become separated from his unit. The logical response would be interrogation, followed by execution. Instead, the humans were providing medical aid. "Easy there, big guy," murmured Corporal Jackson, carefully cleaning a plasma burn on the alien's arm. "We're not gonna hurt you." Asterisk the Keth soldier, barely more than a juvenile by Imperium standards, stared at his captors with confusion. His conditioning had prepared him for torture, for death, for any number of tactical scenarios, but not for this inexplicable compassion from an enemy. "Why?" the young warrior asked in halting English. Private Santos, who had lost her entire family in the first bombardment, knelt beside him. "Because you're hurt," she said simply. "Because underneath all that fancy armor, you're just scared like the rest of us." Fane watched, transfixed, as the humans treated their enemies' wounds with the same care they would show their own injured. It was militarily insane. The wounded soldier possessed valuable intelligence. His medical needs consumed resources the humans could barely spare. Logically, they should eliminate him. Asterisk. Instead, they demonstrated something the Keth had bred out of themselves centuries ago: mercy without strategic purpose. "This changes nothing," the young Keth soldier said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Doesn't have to change anything," Santos replied. "But when you go back to your people, you remember that humans chose to heal instead of harm. Maybe that's worth something." That night, in a hidden communications bunker, Dr. Sarah Chun made contact with resistance cells across the globe. The reports painted a picture of asymmetric warfare unlike anything in military history. "London cell reports they're using Shakespeare," she announced to the gathered commanders, "reciting sonnets over open channels." Apparently, the aliens can't decode the emotional subtext, so they don't know if it's intelligence or just poetry. General Hayes laughed despite herself. "What about Moscow? They're broadcasting Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture on loop. The Keth keep trying to jam it because they think it's some kind of encoded message. It's tying up their entire signals intelligence network." Around the table, battle-hardened soldiers and civilians shared exhausted smiles. They were losing the war by every conventional measure, but somehow they were winning something else, something more important than territory or strategic advantage. They were proving that humanity's greatest strength lay not in what they had optimized away, but in what they had chosen to keep: their beautiful, chaotic, utterly illogical commitment to values that transcended mere survival dot high above the planet. General Thane stood in his command center, studying intelligence reports. That made no tactical sense. Human resistance was actually increasing as their situation became more hopeless. Their communications networks hummed with expressions of love, art, music, and defiance. They shared food with strangers, told stories to children, and died with songs on their lips. They're not fighting to win, he realized aloud. They're fighting to remain human. For the first time in his genetically perfect existence, General Thane began to wonder if the Keth had sacrificed something essential in their quest for optimal efficiency. They had achieved flawless coordination, superior technology, and tactical supremacy over every species in the galaxy, but they had never learned how to transform defeat into victory through sheer refusal to surrender their souls. The end came not with a grand battle, but with a child's laughter echoing through the ruins of Detroit. General Thane heard it while conducting his final reconnaissance, a sound so unexpected that his enhanced neural processors struggled to categorize it. In a bombed-out playground, a group of human children were playing, actually playing, while their parents stood guard with improvised weapons. "Marco!" called out a little girl, her eyes covered with a torn piece of cloth. "Polo," came the responses. From around the rubble, children's voices bright with joy despite the devastation surrounding them. It was the most irrational thing Thane had witnessed in 37 days of impossible human behavior. The children should be traumatized, catatonic, broken by the horror of invasion. Instead, they had found a way to create happiness in the midst of apocalypse. "Sir," Lieutenant Kira's voice came through his unusually quiet. "We have a problem." Thane reluctantly pulled himself away from observing the children. "Report. It's the new recruits, the young Keth warriors. They're asking questions." Back on the Dominion, Thane found his command staff in unprecedented chaos. 36 juvenile soldiers stood in perfect formation, but their questions shattered that perfection like stones through glass. "General," spoke the young warrior who had been treated by human medics, "we request clarification on tactical doctrine." Thane's silver eyes narrowed. "Explain." "The humans demonstrate combat effectiveness through what our manuals classify as weakness. They prioritize individual welfare over strategic advantage, yet this produces superior outcomes. They make decisions based on emotional rather than logical criteria, yet their resistance exceeds all predictive models. Request explanation of this paradox." Captain Vex stepped forward, his scarred face stern. "There is no paradox. The humans are inferior. Their resistance is meaningless noise before inevitable conquest." But even as Vex spoke, another report arrived. The human resistance had somehow infiltrated and destroyed 3 Keth supply depots simultaneously, using tactics no military algorithm had anticipated. Worse, they had done so without causing a single civilian casualty, despite strategic advantages that would have made such precision impossible. The young Keth soldier looked directly at Thane. If human methods are inferior, why do they achieve superior results? It was a question that had haunted Thane for weeks. He had watched humans sacrifice strategic positions to save wounded enemies. He had seen them share scarce resources with non-combatants. He had observed them creating art and music and hope in the middle of warfare. All of it should have made them weaker. Instead, it had made them unbreakable. Dr. Sarah Chun stood in the ruins of the United Nations building, broadcasting on every frequency the Keth had failed to jam. Her words were meant for the alien fleet above, but they reached something else, the growing doubt in General Thane's perfect mind. "You came here expecting to find another species to conquer," she said, her voice steady despite the plasma burns that marked her arms. "But you found something else instead. You found humans. And the thing about humans is that we're not optimized for any single purpose. We're messy and contradictory and emotional and gloriously, magnificently imperfect. We love things that don't love us back. We fight for principles that exist only in our hearts. We create beauty in the middle of destruction, find hope in impossible circumstances, and choose compassion even when logic says we should choose survival. You made yourselves perfect, and in doing so, you made yourselves brittle. You eliminated every quality that makes existence meaningful, and you called it strength. But real strength isn't the absence of weakness. It's the integration of everything that makes us who we are, flaws and all. On the Dominion, the young Keth warriors listened to the broadcast with unprecedented attention. Their questions multiplied. Why did humans sing while dying? Why did they save enemies who would kill them tomorrow? Why did they fight harder when fighting became impossible? General Fane found himself unable to provide answers that satisfied his own enhanced intellect, let alone theirs. That night, alone, in his chambers, Fane did something no Keth had done in 3 millennia. He allowed himself to feel uncertainty. The emotion was alien, overwhelming, terrifying. It made him question everything about Keth's superiority, everything about the Imperium's expansion across the galaxy dot. What if they had been wrong? What if optimization and perfection had made them less than what they could have been, rather than more? What if humanity's refusal to eliminate their contradictions and flaws represented not weakness, but a form of strength that Keth had never understood? The next morning, General Fane made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. He opened communications with the human resistance and spoke 5 words that had never before been transmitted from a Keth vessel. We wish to learn from you. The war was over, but something unprecedented had begun. The first time in galactic history that conquerors had chosen to be conquered by the courage, creativity, and beautiful imperfection of those they had underestimated dot in the rubble of Detroit. Children continued to play while their parents began the long work of teaching an ancient species what it truly meant to be alive. Asterisk,